Let's kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for the time that we have to study. We know, Lord, that sometimes it can be overwhelming. There's so many lines of thought and so many examinations of self as we look at these truths, and so many uncertainties, human uncertainties about ourselves, about the direction of this movement. And that's when we focus upon those problems, Lord, we know that we can be discouraged, but we know, Lord, that you are leading, and we just invite your presence through your Holy Spirit here as we study together. I know, Lord, that you've given us all a burden for this message, and you've given us all different abilities and talents, Lord, that you need each one of us in understanding these truths. You need each of us to do his part and help us to be faithful. Give us the strength to be faithful in the work that you've given us to do. Guide us in this meeting this morning, and help me to sort through these lines and to make sense, but not just sense, that it may be truth. And we ask this and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So good morning, everyone. Now, in this study, we're studying Samuel Snow's letters, which we did study last week. If you remember, I believe it was on Wednesday, where the camera was down and I had to share everything on the screen. And that worked out really well, providentially. It worked very well. But I'm going to draw Samuel Snow's letters again, and we're going to look at the chiasms. And this study today and tomorrow's study are really part of the same study, because when we're looking at Samuel Snow's letters, and particularly the one chiasm, we're going to address what we're going to study next week, but look at it in a bit more detail. And the study tomorrow is the Midnight Chiasm is the title that I've given, but really it's how the Midnight Chiasm fits with all these other chiasms. Now we know that the center chiasm is the one we studied yesterday. The center, at least from a meaning perspective, which is the cross of Christ. And as we look at the chiasms in Snow's letters, I'm going to be referencing back to earlier chiasms and looking forward. So I'm really trying to show how what happened in Millerite history is connected with past histories and, of course, our present time. So some of us are very familiar with this chiasm. And, it was understood in 2017. And as I pointed out, the 2017, and in other studies I've pointed this out, but 2017 was the year that we began organization. And a lot happened in 2017. It was really, in some ways, and actually literally, it was really the center of this movement, time-wise, just from the latter part of this movement, specifically addressing our parallel with Samuel Snow. So, I'm going to try to explain that. But, in 2017, I had presented Samuel Snow's letters on September 23rd. And this is at Lambert Church. And if you go to the Lambert Church YouTube page, you will find my presentation. And in the context in 2017, we were studying the prediction before midnight. And I also had come to understand Samuel Snow's letters in the context of what was happening at that time. And I had, made some suggestions, but they were kind of ignored. So people could see that these letters existed, but one is people didn't really understand them. But also there was opposition, an underground movement of opposition to Samuel Snow's letters. And it wasn't until 2018 that Jeff came to understand them himself and then began presenting them. He had presented them a little bit before, but in 2018, he really began to understand Samuel Snow's letters. And so it became one of his major presentations. Now, in how he first presented it, he would do it in a very simplified way. And there was nothing wrong with that because he was showing the chiasm. Now, just to get them up here on the board so we can look at it, we know that his first letter was written on February 16th and published on February 22nd and republished on April 3rd, all in 1844. And so, so it's the first letter published and then the first letter republished. So, and this is in the Midnight Cry and this is in the Signs. And this one is published with a disclaimer. And the relationship between these two comes from Ezra chapter 6. And in Ezra chapter 6, you'll see that there's the dedication of the temple on the 3rd day of the 12th month in 515 BC. So, and then there is this Passover on the 14th day of the 1st month in 515. So I'll do this differently. I'll do this here. This is 515. And this is Ezra 6. And so this relationship between the dedication of the temple and the Passover occurs in 515, but it occurs in the two publishings. So it's the dedication of the temple date. This is the biblical date in 1844. And this is the biblical date as far as the rabbis were concerned. But we know that there was actually a Passover here on May 2nd because the rabbis and Karaite Jews did not add the extra month in 1844, but the Millerites did. And so this is the second letter. And so his second letter, we don't know the writing date, but we do know the publishing date is the 14th day of the 1st month. So this is the 14th day of the 13th month from the biblical calendar perspective. This is from the rabbinic. So we know that this is a Passover, and this is in the Midnight Cry, but this is a Passover, and then this is a Passover as well. But in this context, obviously in 515, it's the correct Passover. But here in 1844, this Passover is not the correct Passover. And we know that this 14th day of the 1st month, being the Passover, the topic of Snow's second letter is the cross in 31 AD. So basically, what we did yesterday, that chiasm, is the topic of the May 2nd letter. So he's presenting for the first time this 3.5 years and 3.5 years division of the 70th week of Christ. And contrary to how Miller understood it as being 7 years that Christ ministered on earth and not understanding this transition between earth and heaven. And so we addressed that yesterday. Now, we know that Snow then is going to have a third letter, and the third letter is written on June 22nd. And The significance of this is it's the 6th day of the 3rd month, and that's Pentecost. So I'll put it up here, Pentecost. Now, this connects to the chiasm in 457 BC, because in 457 BC, we have that chiasm that goes from this 3 days on the 12th day of the 1st month, and then 3 days after the 1st day of the 5th month. So this is the river Ahava, and this is their arrival at Jerusalem. 3 days they wait until they give the gold and silver to the temple, and the gold and silver here is divided 3 days before they leave the river Ahava. And the center of this is the 6th day of the 3rd month. And the significance of this being 54 days, and this being 107 days, and this being an ordinal count and this being a cardinal count, so together they add up to 107 days, has to do with, in Millerite history, the chiasm. And we're going to also deal with that chiasm a little bit more in detail, but we're first putting up Samuel Snow's letters. But we know that this is the 5th day of the 4th month, and so that's going to be midnight over here, July 21st. So that's midnight, and that's Boston. Right, so that's going to be a center of a chiasm in Millerite history between the 1st and 2nd disappointments. So this being the 5th day of the 4th month, and here he's going to be declaring the 10th day of the 7th month, as we're going to look at a bit more in detail. The fact that this is doubled here, and you have this structure in 457, pointing to Pentecost. This puts a lot of emphasis here in 1844 on Pentecost. Now, Pentecost is a symbol of organization, but it's a particular type of organization. That is, Christ is pouring out the Holy Spirit on his disciples in Acts chapter 2, in 31 AD. And when he's doing so, he's beginning his work in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary. And so one of the things that we fail to understand in studying the sanctuary, because we're Seventh-day Adventists, we should know about the sanctuary, but we rarely study the feasts. Most Adventists, unless you're a feast keeper, you probably don't know about the feasts. And the feast keepers, of course, miss the point because they try to take them literally something that you have to do, instead of understanding their symbolic references. But we know here that, we have these 2 Passovers, and between these 2 Passovers, we have April 19th. Now, April 19th is not a part of Samuel Snow's letters. It's the 1st day of the 1st month. So that's the first disappointment, as we call it, though we've studied and found that really there was lots of disappointment. It's just the first disappointment is the end of Miller's prediction. So it's basically Miller's complete disappointment, with a bunch of disappointments leading up to it. And then, of course, we have the great disappointment over on the other side. Now, April 19th becomes this dividing line. And the way that we had understood the line of, and we're going to go through this tomorrow, if I remember to do it properly, but we did do this. We did line up the fact that in Millerite history, we have August 11th, 1840, and we have April 19th, 1844. And this is the first angel is empowered, and here the second angel arrives. And in our history, both of these are 9/11. And this was a problem when I was first looking at Samuel Snow's letters. And I'm going to try to really cover that a little bit here, but hopefully more when we bring it into our time. But we know that in our time we have these 2 waymarks. And the problem with April 19th is that, as I was looking at Snow's letters, Snow begins before April 19th, but he begins after August 11th, 1840. And so I was thinking about 9/11 being this event, and so not understanding how to fit in this Snow being the priest, being Ezekiel, how to fit him in when he comes in before April 19th. But then so that is, we would look at 9/11 and we'd say, how do we fit him in? And I'm not sure if people understand what I mean here. But in this context, he's after 9/11 because he's after August 11th, 1840. So April 19th, in the context of Snow's letters, is this 9/11, not this 9/11, if that makes sense to people. Because we have these two choices of 9/11, and just because we bring them together in our history, we can still separate them in our history with Samuel Snow's letters. So that's what I'm going to try to show a little bit tomorrow as I go over that structure. Now, July 18th is the publication of Snow's last letter called Confirming the Covenant. And here he's reiterating this truth here regarding the midst of the week. But he's making some applications which I don't think are correct in how he's trying to understand that. And I suggest that people read that letter. Now, you know, I've thought about it. I went over some of his Jubilee Standards. So the Jubilee Standard is a paper that he began publishing in 1845. And in the Jubilee Standard, it's mostly letters of people written to him, and his response to the opposition that he's experiencing, in placing himself as being a prophet. You know, he's not explicit in 1845, but because he was so involved in this prediction regarding October 22nd, 1844, he then tries to place himself as the one who has the answers to the disappointment. Now, anybody, of course, watching and seeing me presenting could place, if we were going to, we could place a parallel in that I'm somebody who made a prediction regarding July 18th. And I don't want to be misunderstood here. I could, if I wanted to, or if I imagined that somehow that made me special, and then I'm going to be the person who comes in and cleans up after the disappointment with this special truth because I'm some enlightened person. I don't believe that's the case. Now, many people have wanted to be Samuel Snow. The problem with that is that in our line, Snow is not an individual. Snow is a movement. And one of the things we see in Samuel Snow's letters is we see in this first disappointment, we see a division that occurs, but we're also going to see a division that continues to occur. And in trying to place April 19th in our history, you know, we've placed it at 9/11, but April 19th also, and I'm going to make a claim that may sound a little bit wrong, but we know that this is 9/11 and this is 9/11, but there is a sense in which the second angel arrives, not on 9/11, but it arrives in 2014. Now, I say that, so I've just said a bunch of crazy things as far as I'm concerned within this movement. Now, I did address this idea of sunset, and sunset is April 19th. And we could line this up again in our history. We could keep 9/11, but we could put this as 2014. And why do I say that? I say that because on 2014, we began a separation in this movement. And that separation within this movement, so not in the big line, and this is where things became confused, and I'm going to really go through this tomorrow. But within the big line, 2014 is not a waymark. 2014 is not part of the big line. Actually, everything that this movement is doing is not part of the big line. And even though we kind of know that, we still apply those things as if they are waymarks. So when I say 2014 can line up with April 19th, it's in the context of Snow's letters, because Snow's letters is this movement. But you cannot put 2014 as the arrival of the second angel's message in the big line. So there's something about 9/11, because we are the children of 9/11, that we need to separate this 9/11 in a sense that we are in this history of 9/11. This is all about 9/11, this movement. And so when we do that, when we see that we can take 2014 and we can make it as arrival of the second angel's message in this movement, we see something that it actually becomes really obvious once we look at this. Now, and we know that we had a person he wasn't publicly claiming to be Samuel Snow, but he definitely, when I asked him about it, he said, well, you're going to see. So he was basically confirming that he thought he was Snow. And he brought in this idea of sunset. And he wanted to place sunset in 2014. And he was lining it up with April 19th, because if this is midnight, this is sunset. And he wasn't wrong. The problem is he was wrong in his application of who he was and the application of which line he was dealing with, because he was trying to deal with the personal line. And this movement is not about any individuals. This movement is a movement. It's typified by Ezekiel and Snow. And we make a mistake when we try to apply individuals who may be playing a role that we could apply and say, well, this person did this and that parallels this. But that person is still just a person, and he's not going to continue carrying on that role. We're not set up in that way in our history. And this is a big problem. It's something that was introduced. I wouldn't say that Jeff introduced it. I think that Jeff understood that he was playing a role parallel to Miller in the history from 1989 to 9/11. But he wasn't suggesting it in the way that it was later developed, such as Mark Bruce introduced, and then Parminter used and manipulated to position himself to try to take over this movement. They were applying it in a different way than Jeff was. Jeff was just realizing the fact that there was this movement that began in 1989, and he was the only one he really knew who was developing this, but other people were as well. Other people were a part of that movement in 1989. They just weren't organized together as part of the movement. So other people were being taught these same truths and different parts of these truths, and these all came together after 9/11. So the various people who God had been leading, God led them to this movement. So you can't put Jeff and say that just Jeff is Miller, and then that Jeff has to be Miller all the way through this history. We do an injustice to the lines, and we put a pressure upon Jeff that's not really fair, and a responsibility. But we can't do that with any individual. So nobody is Snow. I mean, I've tried to emphasize this. Maybe people don't agree with me. I don't know. But it's definitely something that we have to recognize, that Ezekiel and Snow are typifying this movement, not some individual. And that was always a mistake. Now, so in here, when I'm going to look at this line here, which we already understand, we came to understand this line in 2017, and it was early in 2017. I don't have the dates for everything, but it was definitely April and May in 2017 that this idea of Samuel Snow's letters, of not actually the letters, but of the prediction before midnight, this term showed up. So we called it the PBM. And the PBM was this idea that we have midnight over here, and midnight's going to be Raphia. Right? That's this battle between the king of the north and the king of the south. So we have some ideas of what we think Raphia is, and we're marking it at midnight. And midnight in our line are events that occur prior to the Sunday law. So we know we have midnight and the midnight cry, and we're marking them as Raphia and Paneum in 2017. We have developed this understanding, and it began in January, well, really in December, but it was presented in January in Alberta by Jeff on January 14th, 2017. So we have this truth about Raphia and Paneum, midnight and the midnight cry. And in the midst of this, as we start to understand Raphia and Paneum, we have this prediction before midnight. And so the idea is that we have midnight here where Samuel Snow proclaims that it's midnight, but we have this development of truth that leads up to that. That is, it's not just at midnight out of nowhere, all of a sudden, that he has this revelation. It's actually progressed. And we saw that last week when we studied the disappointments. There's this progression of truth. Now, everybody knew about the February 16th letter published on February 22nd. But then was introduced this May 2nd letter. It was done by Tabo. It wasn't his idea, but he promoted it as if it was his idea. And this idea was that this was the prediction before midnight. Now, the problem with that is we started to find that there was other letters. Now, this one, of course, had presented this magnificent truth of the week of Christ. But we then found that there was a July 18th letter and also this Pentecost letter. And I can't remember who found which letters. I know I found some of them. I think it was the Pentecost one that I had discovered. And somebody else, I think Tanya had discovered July 18th. At least that's who I think did. But it doesn't really matter who discovered it. The point is that different people were involved. This wasn't one man's idea. It was something that happened within the movement. The movement started to develop this idea of the prediction before midnight. And what they were doing was paralleling the history of Samuel Snow's letters. Because now they were making a prediction before midnight. And it had already been developing, and it wasn't until 2017 that we realized that this was developing. So here we are, around May 2nd, 2017, and we're talking about May 2nd, 2017, or 1844. We're talking about this letter as the prediction before midnight. Now, lots happens in 2017. 2017 is a year in this movement that is packed with information. We have Raphia and Paneum. We have the prediction before midnight. Then we have organization occurring. We have the Italian camp meeting, and then we have the camp meeting in the fall. I think it's a German camp meeting, or is it a French camp meeting? I can't remember. That happens in September. Stephen would remember where it was. And that's where they did organization. So you're going to have in September of 2017, this organizational camp meeting. And at that camp meeting, we never knew what happened at that camp meeting. That is, it was all shut down. So some stuff happened there regarding organization, and it was secret. We weren't allowed to know what happened at that camp meeting, which should have been a warning sign to us. And then we also have in 2017, we have presentations at the School of the Prophets by Parminder on the nature of man. And these were very subtle attacks upon the nature of Christ and upon righteousness by faith. Very, very subtle, because he was presenting some things that were true, but he had enough error mixed in that he was leading people down a certain path that even I wasn't able to be completely aware of, even though I understand righteousness by faith. I've studied it in detail, all Jones and Wagner's books, and what Ellen White has to say about it. So I thought I understood it. And so when he was presenting, you know, there were some things he was presenting that I knew were correct, but there was things that confused me, and it confused a lot of other people as well. So there was all this stuff happening: organization, new light, this proposal of this prediction before midnight, and then Samuel Snow's letters, developing an understanding. And on September 23rd, 2017, I presented Lambert Church Samuel Snow's letters. And what I present is the chiasm. And that chiasm is simply that this is 2 months and 16 days from the second month and the 16th day in 1844 to May 2nd. And then it's again 2 months and 16 days. And this makes this the center of a chiasm, with it being the Passover and the presentation that is of the chiasm in the 70th week by Samuel Snow. So this ties together this chiasm with this presentation of the chiasm. So this makes this extremely significant. In Christ's line is being tied to Samuel Snow's letters, but it's also being tied to our history, because we're going through this at that very time. Now, July 18th being the prediction before midnight, that is, it's the end of the chiasm. For me, the argument was it was 3 days before midnight. And one of the things we saw in 457 is there was these periods of 3 days, 20th day of the 9th month over here, with the 10th day of the 7th month in the middle. So in 457 BC, we again have these chiasms, just like we do here. We have 2 chiasms, and these chiasms have these 3 days attached to it. And here, this chiasm here has this 3 days after it. And Tabo had presented in the story of Joseph, the butler and the bakers, 3 days from their dreams when Joseph interprets them to when they're fulfilled, as a symbol of the prediction before midnight. He introduces also the river Ahava as a symbol of the prediction before midnight. But he didn't accept this 3 days because he wanted to focus on the date that he had given, May 2nd. Now, to be honest, he should have seen that this was all part of a structure. Part of the thing that I saw the beauty of is that he was presenting May 2nd, and Dwayne Dewey was presenting July 18th. And Dwayne was in opposition to Tabo. And, you know, I'm being very honest about what happened in that history, because we know that Dwayne's presentations were taken down because he spoke disparagingly of Tabo. And of course, you know, this is me speculating. I haven't talked to Dwayne about it, but I assume that would be very hurtful, and probably led to what ended up happening later on in 2018 when he left the message. So, but here in 2017, I'm seeing this harmony of what's being presented. I'm seeing that God is tying July 18th to May 2nd with February 16th, and that this is this whole structure, and that we shouldn't be looking at this as some kind of competition between people. We should see that God is bringing a harmony. And my focus in 2017 was upon Pentecost, because what I saw is that we had this beginning of the separation beginning in 2014, which I was relating back to the false priests and this false Passover. So the Passover becomes the separating line. And 9/11 is here in the middle of this. But this 9/11 is this 9/11. So we can see that there's this separation that begins in 2014. And this to me is about this separation that begins in 2014 and then continues. And in my view, it had happened in 2017, because 2014 and 2017 were connected in this. We had another major split, and it continued and bled over into 2018. And then we had this other major split that happened in 2019. So we had these periods of division that were happening. But in 2017, 2018 hadn't happened yet, and 2019 hadn't happened yet. So I was under the impression that we had this division, and now we needed to go into Pentecost, and Pentecost was organization. And to me, this just made a lot of sense. That, you know, God has had this separation, and this is what we've seen happening in this movement, this separation, the sifting of the wheat and the tares. And so we should have had the people here who understand these truths, organizing. And then the idea was we're gonna move ahead, and we're gonna give this prediction before midnight on July 18th. Now, when I say on July 18th, I'm just saying in July 18th, 1844. Nowhere in my mind was this July 18th a date regarding you know, an event in our time, because we're not time setting in 2017. We're looking at time that has passed, and we know time is in this message, but we're not looking for specific dates for any event to occur. But the fact that we ended up making this prediction as July 18th in 2020, I think is extremely profound. And I still say that July 18th, 2020 is the prediction before midnight. Now, then when we look at that, we have to ask ourselves, in whose line, right? So this is what I want to develop a little bit more tomorrow, is to really nail down these lines. But all I can say is that we know the line of the priests, the way that we had it set up is that they overlap. Each of the waymarks from one line becomes the next waymark in the other line to some degree. There was some little shuffling of these waymarks. But what I came to understand is that the line of the priests occurs before Raphael, and that our line, this prediction before midnight, and everything that we've experienced is not the line of the Levites. It's the line of the priests. And there was no reason to overlap them in the way that we did. This was just an assumption. It seemed to work and fit, but we were dealing with the future, and we weren't dealing with things that had already occurred. And so this was just a suggestion, and it's how we did it. But it's not how it happens in Millerite history. As you can see, if Snow is the priest and Snow is Ezekiel, that he has this whole history here that happens before midnight. Now we know Ezekiel is actually going to proclaim at midnight. So Ezekiel is still, in a sense, if you want to look at it in one way, and I'm going to try to parse this out in more detail tomorrow to see how well I do in explaining it, that people can understand it, and also I want to see people's opinions about it. But if you look at this here, if you look at Samuel Snow, this prediction before midnight is developed, and then on midnight he then says it's midnight, and then it's empowered on August 15th. We know that Ezekiel begins here. And so I'm saying that Ezekiel is Snow, but Ezekiel is Snow here. Ezekiel is not Snow here, right? Because this is Snow developing this prediction before midnight. And if we're going to look at, and I do want to do an in-depth study on Ezekiel, and I'm not sure when I'm going to do it, because Ezekiel is a big topic. It's not just 1 week of study. I would say it's several weeks of study if we're going to do it in this fashion, if we're going to do any justice to it. Because Ezekiel contains way more information than we could ever see, than my mind could ever grasp. Ezekiel has been my study since I was a child, never understanding it, of course, but just fascinated by Ezekiel. He, in a sense, is an apocalyptic prophet like John is and like Daniel is. He has a lot of the same characteristics, but it's just a book that's not well understood and well studied. So you know, we need to look at Ezekiel. But anyway, what I can say about Ezekiel is that Ezekiel begins here at midnight. He doesn't have this development. And we, of course, know that Samuel Snow, we never even understood that he was here until recently, because we always looked at August 15th. It's like Snow just shows up riding in on this horse on August 15th and gets up on the stage, takes it from Brother Bates, and all of a sudden, there's this new light that has come. But this new light had been developing and been presented in papers that Millerites had been reading. But it's not until August 15th that it's fully understood. Now, we do know at Boston he presents it, and people do receive it, not everybody. And then he also presents it at Concord. Now, some people have tried to place Concord as a waymark, and I don't place it as a waymark. It's just a place along the way where we get from Boston to Exeter. But it's at Boston that it's presented, it's Exeter it's empowered. And there is symbolism in Concord. I'm not saying that Concord doesn't have any role, but the way that it was tried to be applied, I think, is wrong. And so I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to go into Concord, at least not at this point in these studies. But I do think we have to look at Concord at some point, because it does have a role. But it's not midnight, and it's not the midnight cry. So it's something in between. And to try to understand what that is, you could say maybe it's a swelling of the message. There's lots of different ways that we could look at it if we wanted to apply it to our time. But my point is here that this development of this message, in Ezekiel, he starts at midnight, but he still has a development of that message. And that a message that he has developed is not, letters or information or something that has to do with him particularly. It has to do with Josiah, or not just Josiah and Jehoiachin, and the captivity of Jehoiachin and its connection to the prophecy of Josiah. So there's a connection there that we see. Now we know Josiah Lich is parallel to Josiah in that they both have these prophecies in a sense that are being fulfilled. Now, of course, Josiah Lich, he's not part of the prophecy. Josiah is the topic of the prophecy, and Ezekiel's the one who proclaims the prophecy of Josiah in it, and that it was fulfilled. He uses it to make his prediction before midnight. So the idea that there's this prediction before midnight, one is we could see with Ezekiel, he's going to make that prediction at midnight. But so is Samuel Snow. But there's this development of truth that's occurring before midnight. So before he can actually declare it's midnight, he has to get there, but he has to understand it. And so it's this understanding here that is about this movement. So that's my argument dealing with Samuel Snow's letters. Now, I'm going to erase this. Well, actually, before I erase it, I just want to point out something which I have pointed out. But when we found July 18th Julian, so we had July 18th Julian and 2020. This was based upon Ezekiel's 10th day of the 5th month. And that 10th day of the 5th month, which becomes what he's actually predicting is the destruction of Jerusalem on the 10th day of the 5th month. And he's going to begin that at midnight. But here we're looking back at a history that's before. And so this 10th day of the 5th month in 2020 is July 31st on the Gregorian calendar. But this is the first date. And the thing that I had done, and I've shown this, is I counted 391.5 days between the July 18th, 2020, and I just came back to a date that was June 22nd. And then from there, we discovered that there was another chiasm in Samuel Snow's letters, and this chiasm was from April 19th to February 16th. Now, in counting this, if somebody's really careful and looks at it, they'll realize that this is actually 127 days. But we still say this is 63 days and 63 days. So somebody looking at it would say, well, how is that? Well, part of the problem here is we know that this is a leap year. So, we could make a case for that. But that would actually make this 61 and this 60, or 62 and this 63 if we took out that leap year. So this is really 64 days. So we have to count it differently. And there's a reason why we count it differently. And that's what I'm going to show tomorrow when I deal with our history. But the point is, we came to understand that this structure here was a structure that we had in our history. That's not what I'm going to go through. And this would be June 9th, June 15th. This would be July 27th. This would be August 11th, Gregorian. This would be August 11th, Julian. And this would be October 13th. This would all be in 2018 in our history. So we're going to look at that tomorrow. But the point is that we could parallel this, and this is going to be part of the Midnight Chiasm. That's what we want to look at, is what happened in our history. How all these different truths and that's why it's a tough presentation to do, because we have to understand, in order to see it, we have to understand the chiasms that happen in the story of Joseph. And we have to know who Joseph is. So we didn't really address that too much. We said that Joseph was Christ. But there's Joseph, and there's Joseph's family, and there's Pharaoh, and there's all this different symbolism that we didn't really address. And then we also have to look at the line of Ezekiel. Even though the line of Ezekiel doesn't have a particular chiasm, we didn't really address that. We know that Ezekiel is connected. And Ezekiel gives us these connections that creates these chiasms and these structures in Millerite history. And then we know, of course, we have the chiasms that exist in 457. So 457, these two chiasms here are important, as are also the first day of the first month over here, when he leaves Babylon, and the first day of the fifth month. We already understood those as connecting to this history. So it's not on this line, but we do have the first day of the first month here, and then August 15th being the first day of the fifth month. So the Midnight Cry is connected with this history in the story of Ezra. And then we have to try to understand who's being represented here. Now, the other thing about this is that we have, in this story, the priests are given the gold and the silver. So I'm going to try to address this again tomorrow. I'm going to try to bring everything together. But if you look in this history in 457, and this is the third step in a reform line. So this is Artaxerxes' decree. So it's not a whole reform line, but it has aspects of a reform line. But there are things about this journey that actually parallel our history. And so we can take and one of the things is we have the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinim in this history, and then the singers and the porters and all these different groups, and trying to understand that. So I'm not necessarily giving a complete comprehension or understanding of all these things, but I want to point us to that there is a movement or a line within here of a group of people that is separate. And the priests and the Levites, of course, are different groups than the people. And we know that the priests come and there is no Levites, and Ezra then has to call the Levites. So that priests and the Levites in this history at the river Ahava have to do with this prediction before midnight. So that's a very sketchy way of explaining it, just because there's so much that needs to be understood. Now, I know that, I'm always talking, and hopefully, Stephen said the Romanian, it was the Romanian camp meeting from the 4th to 11th of September in 2017. Thanks for that, Stephen. But if anybody does have a comment or a question, feel free to ask or comment. What's that?
You haven't put up the 27th of June or the 29th of June.
The 29th of June?
And the 27th?
Yeah, so the 29th of June in 457 is the first day of the fifth month. In this history, the July 18th letter is written on June 29th. So there's a symbolism of the writing of this letter to July 18th. Now, the reason why I don't put them in is that they're not part of these structures overall. That is, The reason why this structure is important is because the dates that it's marking, Passovers, Pentecost, and then the date for the dedication of the temple, these are all your main waymarks, plus April 19th is the first disappointment that becomes the center of these two dates. And then February 16th is just the starting point of Samuel Snow's letters. But what Stephen is pointing out is that this June 22nd letter is published on June 27th, which is the 11th day of the third month. On the 11th day of the third month, June 27th and June 22nd are symbols of 627 and 622. Now, if I double 11 day third month, it's 22nd day, 6th month, which is June 22nd. But we know in Ezekiel, June 22nd and June 27th are the two dates. The one date is the date that the prophecy is fulfilled. That's 622 or 627 BC. That's when the prophecy is fulfilled. And then Josiah's Passover happens on 622. So 627 is when Josiah's prophecy is fulfilled from 977. And then 622 is when it's the referencing the Passover of Josiah in the 18th year of his reign. And the significance of that is, and I hope this is why Stephen's bringing it out, it's not just that we have these dates, but these dates here tie us to Ezekiel, referencing, even though he's starting here at midnight, he's referencing this prophecy of Josiah and Josiah himself. And we can see that that's then referenced in these two dates here in Samuel Snow's letters. So I think that's probably what he wanted me to point out, that we can't separate Ezekiel and 622 and 627 BC from Samuel Snow's letters, right? So Samuel Snow's letters are tied up with these two dates. The doubling of this one, which shows that it's a doubling as a symbol of midnight and the midnight cry, and then it gives you this date. So I've done that before, showed that before. And then this June 29th date is just the date that's the first day of the fifth month in 457. So June 29th ties us to 457. And then that's published on July 18th. So that's the confirming of the covenant. So these are wheels within wheels. Each of these things locks in to the other. And so the problem with this, the difficulty, is that we need to understand these chiasms and these lines. And we need to understand these dates. And not everybody is good at that. Not everybody can just remember dates and numbers. And so, my suggestion is always that you draw these things out. And these things have been presented. Odilia has presented, and Stephen has presented, June 27th, and the symbolism of that is 627. And June 22nd is the symbolism of 622. Now, June 22nd becomes really important in this movement. So when I deal with the midnight chiasm, and then I start to expand the other chiasms in our history, so I'm going to do that tomorrow. June 22nd was a date that was picked out by Jeff for its significance, but it becomes a part of a chiasm that locks all the other chiasms in our history together in this, it just binds them all together into this tight-knit structure that is extremely profound. And it tells us something about July 18th of what it means as far as this movement is concerned. And that it should have been a prediction that would not occur as we expected it. That is, and I've dealt with this before, but I want to add some things to it tomorrow to focus upon this, because part of the problem is understanding who we are. And, I've repeated this many, many times, but I don't think that in this movement we understand who we are and where we were in the lines. And so our role was skewed as what we thought was going to happen, because we thought that we were going to develop this movement, that organization, what organization meant was we would have a church, and that this church would call people out of the Seventh-day Adventist church into this church. And that was an error, because that's not what the lines tell us. Because if June 22nd is a symbol of organization, it's a symbol of a particular type of organization that occurred. It's a different type of organization than what we had in 1863. 1863, we know as organization, and it establishes God's people, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as God's people, as God's denominated people. But it's after a failure. It's the result of disobedience that has to occur, because Christ should have come. We didn't need to have a church organized. But the reason why we had to have a church organized was because we ended up failing, and we were then in the first generation. And we don't want that to happen again. So, is this a line of failure? As far as the line of the priest is concerned, because of our role, we had to fail. Our expectations had to be disappointed. That had to happen in our line in order for us to take the role that God has given us. If July 18th had occurred as we expected, we wouldn't have been able to fulfill that role. I don't know if everybody can see that now, but I'm going to try to illustrate it tomorrow. So I said I was going to erase this, and I'm going to erase this to try to illustrate this a little bit better. So obviously all these dates are important, and not every one of us has these in their minds. But when we look at the chiasms that exist in 1844, we obviously have October 22nd, and we have July 21st, and we have April 19th. And we know that this is the center of a chiasm. If I drew it correctly, it would be the center. And of course, we have August 15th. That's very badly drawn, August 15th, and we know this is midnight, and this is the midnight cry, and this is symbol of the Sunday law, and this is 9/11. So if we're putting this in our lines, we look at this and we see this. This is what Jeff taught. Now, when it comes to midnight and the midnight cry and the Sunday law, what we have always taught is that this is the line of the Levites. Well, I shouldn't say we always taught it. We weren't even clear that there was the Levites and the priests. Initially, when we saw midnight cry, there was just this movement. This movement's going to give the midnight cry prior to the Sunday law. And then, of course, we found midnight. And we saw that midnight and midnight cry were part of the same event. That is, midnight cry was given at midnight, and the midnight cry is empowered at a different time after midnight. But as we developed it, we saw that this was the line of the Levites. And so when we were talking about Raphi and Peniam, we were talking about events in the line of the Levites. But we made a mistake. That is, we assumed that our waymarks lined up with their waymarks. But one of the things you can see, and when we look at this line here, just think about this line as the line of the Levites. And if you put this into the big line, right? So I'm going to cram all this stuff over here. You're going to have the loud cry. You're going to have the close of probation. You're going to have the second coming, and all those events over here on this side of the Sunday law. And yet this is the line of the Levites. And, so what we have done is we've just said, well, the line of the Levites is going to line up in this way. And then we would just put the line of the priests' waymarks here. So if we say this is the Sunday law, well, the Sunday law parallels the close of probation, which is really two waymarks over. So we put in this thing called the Nethinim to try to, I'm not saying that's how we did it, but we use it to try to fill in this gap. So we have
the line of the Levites, and then we have the line of the Nethinim. And so the Nethinim, in a sense, have their Sunday law during the loud cry on the big picture and so forth. Now, it all sort of makes sense. I mean, there's a logic to it, but it's not correct. Because one is there is no line of the Nethinim. So the Nethinim, as we've come to understand, are the Protestants. And they join us before the Sunday law. So there's a joining of the two sticks that occur during the image of the beast test. And those people stand with us at the Sunday law. They're not going to be going through an experience here of a loud cry, a close of probation, and all that kind of stuff. Their close of probation of those who join us is going to be the same Sunday law, the same close of probation that ours is as Seventh-day Adventists. But then there is all these other people that have to be reached, and they're not typified by the Nethinim. That's just the line. That's just the big line that Ellen White has always talked about. This is about the world receiving a message, but there's going to be people who give that message, and those people are going to be produced at the Sunday law, and they're going to be Seventh-day Adventists and Protestants who have rejected Protestantism as it is now manifested within Christianity. They're going, because that Protestantism has joined to the papacy. And so the true Protestants are going to come out of the woodwork as we approach that Sunday law. And that's the joining of the two sticks. So I've developed that idea a little bit, maybe not as thoroughly as I could have. But then when we come to this, well, this is the line of the Levites. And so we would just have the priests kind of line up with this. But I'm making the suggestion that the Levites line, or not the Levites, the priest's line is Snow. And Snow, as far as his line is concerned, he's has these letters. And so specifically, I'm going to say it's Snow's letters. Now, this seems a little bit odd, but what it is his letters are the PBM. And so July 18th is the prediction before midnight in his letters, right? So when we look at July 18th for us is tied up actually in this whole structural chiasm. And what I'm saying is that everything that this movement is goes from 9/11 to December 25th, 2021, if you want to put it that way. We're not predicting an event, but we're just saying that that's what our line shows as far as the structural chiasm. So I'm not predicting an event on December 25th, 2021. Now, it may be after that, we might see what that meant, but we can't make a prediction. We're not time setters. Even though we were time setting, God was allowing this to happen because of what was happening in the movement. And he understood that this was going to happen long ago. And so he wanted, the fact that we are Snow and that we're Ezekiel and that we're the priests meant that this was going to happen. And the July 18th would be this prediction before midnight. But it failed to materialize on that date. But we know that Raphi and Peniam have to occur before the Sunday law. Now, I'm not sure when the Sunday law is. I can't tell you because God has not revealed those things to us. But what we do know is that this battle between the king of the north and the king of the south, based on what we understand, has to still occur. We didn't understand it fully, right? We put those, because these are events. Raphi and Peniam are events. They're not waymarks. Now, they can symbolically be applied, and we have, to the United States, to Trump, and so forth. So they can be used as symbols. But Raphia did not occur on November 9th, and Peniam did not occur on July 18th. That, to me, is something that should be really clear to us. Now, July 18th and November 9th, and I'm going to go through this tomorrow, but November 9th, if I'm going to put it like this. November 9th is July 18th. And I'll show you that tomorrow, why that is. Because these are really, we can lay these over top of each other in a particular way. And you'll see why I've already hinted at it and I've already shown it in other places, but I'm going to show why this is. Because this is about the priests. And this, in a sense, we can take all of this, we can take all of Snow's letters, all of this stuff, and put it all together. Now, when I say 9/11 over here, I actually have to put August 11th, 1840 to line up this 9/11. So Snow and the priests come into this movement after August 11th, 1840, after 9/11. And Snow is going to give this development of truth, this prediction before midnight is proclaimed. Now, when I say Snow, Snow's letters are this movement. But this movement is also going to make a proclamation on these dates. Now, or predictions. We're making a prediction about these dates. So these are our proclamation. Raphi and Panium is what our message is about, because this is about Daniel chapter 11. So am I losing people here? Are people kind of getting where I'm going? Because I can't show you it all until tomorrow. I know it's,
I'm getting it.
okay, good, thank you. This, because this is not an easy topic to sort of to unlearn or to unpackage what we understood before and to look at it in a new way. Because this movement, what we went through with July 18th, has to do with this development of truth that is typified by Snow's letters. But it doesn't mean that we don't have a role here. We have a role. One is we've predicted these events, Raphi and Panium. And when those events are fulfilled, if there's any type of vindication of this movement, it's going to be when those events are fulfilled. We were looking at it July 18th to have that vindication, but we weren't ready for that. We will be ready for Raphi and Panium, because God is doing a work right now with us that is necessary. Now, the only way that I could sort of parallel this, or one way I can, is that in Snow's letters here, there's a lack of understanding, a lot of mistakes. Now, many of those mistakes are corrected here and here. Now, I'm not saying that his message is perfect, because when you get to his August 22nd document, The True Midnight Cry, it has lots of errors in it, but not as many errors as his first letter had, the February, so if we put here February 16th. And, if we're going to look at this history here and try to parallel it with ours, which is what we're going to do tomorrow, we need to understand the 391.5. So I'm going to present that. In what happened, and so some of it is review, because people know about the 391.5, but the problem is the application that was made, and what I really want to show is the significance of November 9th and July 18th in the context of this movement. So we're going to have to cover the Italian camp meeting in 2017 and 18 and the dates there. We're going to have to look at what happened in that fulfillment, that part that parallels Samuel Snow's letters. We're going to look at what our expectations were about November 9th, about the close of probation, and why that was a disappointment, and how we sort of rationalize that. And then when we get to July 18th, we're at the same place as the Millerites are on October 22nd, 1844. We've been disappointed again and again, and now we feel that we've gone off track and we have to go back. And that's what some people do. And then some people actually go ahead in more time setting. Now, Samuel Snow has a different take. So I'm gonna go there to deal with Samuel Snow. And what I try to look at with Samuel Snow is in his history is I want to learn some things about mistakes that we could make or are making, or danger signs that we could have in trying to sort out what happened with July 18th. Now, this is on the Ellen White disc that I have. So most people would have these, and these are the Jubilee Standard articles, and they're incomplete. So in the book that I had, which I don't know where the PDF is anymore, I can't find it in my searches through my PDFs. But it was in a book, and he had collected a lot of these letters and his responses to people. Now, when you look here at this Jubilee Standard, it starts here April 17th, and it's going to start actually with so it's a partial, so that means part of the paper is missing. And even in my search on the internet, I can't get the complete Jubilee Standard paper. So one is they weren't largely published, and they didn't all survive in very good shape. So here in this, he addresses first this thing, the three shepherds. So he had done this presentation or article regarding the three shepherds. He says, the last morning watch was published, my correction of its misstatement, has published my correction of its misstatement in relation to the discourse on the 11th chapter of Zechariah, delivered at Franklin Hall. But it also publishes a reply from the pen of Himes, in which he says he would give him the greatest pleasure to correct my statement relating to the three shepherds. Now let it be distinctly understood what I did not ask him to correct, that I did not ask them to correct any statement which I had made. I wish for no such correction. What I requested was that the watch would correct its false statement respecting my public discourse. It had been stated that Brother Snow told the congregation in Franklin Hall a few weeks since, when expounding this chapter, that the Holy Ghost had revealed to him who these three shepherds were. They are Joshua V. Himes, the idol shepherd, and the other two, George Storrs and Josiah Litch. The above statement we declared in our last standard, and still say, was not true. I've never, in a public manner, either by speaking or writing, mentioned those names in connection with that subject. So here he's taking this criticism of Himes, Storrs, and Litch, which he has made, and Joshua V. Himes, wants to. There's this. I don't know all the details of it, but what I gather is that he disagrees with Snow's application of this. So anyway, he says, I didn't actually mention them by name. So I didn't mention who they were, who the three shepherds are. And he goes on to say, but, and he's going to quote here, but so minutely described the character of these poor shepherds in his discourse that no present acquainted with the individuals could avoid the conclusion that he had reference to us. Well, I did but read the Bible and apply it as I was obliged to chronologically to these last days. See the connection of Zechariah chapters 9, 10, and 11 with parallel passages. But if any man does not see that those scriptures must be applied thus, as it regards time, he is too blind to be good and a safe watchman. But here is a plain prophecy of three shepherds of these last days, cut off in 1 month. What shall we do with it? I did no more than hold up the picture as drawn by the prophetic pencil. And some of those who heard my sermon said, he means Himes, Storrs, and Litch. After my discourse, if I mistake not, the question was pronounced by some, if I did not mean those persons, and I did not deny the correctness of the application. What then? Have I not a right of private judgment? And am I under the necessity of affirming or denying anything in relation to it? Somebody was cut off at any rate, for so declares the book of God. And if this is a miserable perversion of the word of God, let those who lay this to my charge make a better application if they can. So one of the things we see here that I think should be a caution to us is in going through this disappointment of October 22nd, 1844, we have these different groups. So we have a group that says the time and the event was wrong. So that's the mockers. It's the people who fall off, starting very early on with all those disappointments. And then we have another group that says the time was correct, but the event was wrong. And so we would have that as Seventh-day Adventists. They're the ones who end up taking that position. And then we would say there, of course, there's the time setters, the one who thinks, well, we had the right event, Jesus is coming, but we need to set another date. And that's the Jehovah's Witnesses, the extreme end of that history. But we also have Snow, and if you read Snow carefully, he accepts the time, and that the event was wrong. And he even gets Christ. He deals with Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. He accepts some of the ideas that Adventists have. So we see that Snow is, he's not wrong in some ways, but where he is wrong is the way in which he is attacking the leadership of the movement. We don't see that attack happen in the spirit of prophecy. Ellen White doesn't really attack any of these things. She doesn't make this application. He also has an extreme shut door doctrine. So he is only ministering to people who were part of the Millerite movement. And as people become alienated from him personally because of his character, he just sees that as the refining of this, group of people that are going to be glorified when Jesus comes back. So there is a fanaticism, and somebody asked me about fanaticism. What is fanaticism? Fanaticism is a belief that is wrong, that a person persists at, and they support it with error. And they deep down inside have to know that it's error. That is, they're not willing to be corrected. One thing you can see about Snow is he has no meekness. He's not willing to be corrected by anybody because he knows he's the prophet in his mind. And so when we go through this time, one is we can't be making one another an enemy. So our role is not to point out the fanatics, so to speak. And our role is not to correct the leadership, in sort of a condemnatory way. Our role is to pull together and to study. And if you look at what the Millerites did, they studied with open hearts and open minds to understand what their mistake was. They didn't set themselves up as the ones who were right. They just wanted to know what was true. And we have to be in that position. We have to be willing to study. We can't take the position that we know everything. And I've proposed a lot of things, and some of them quite radical from what we have been taught. And those things need to be examined. They don't need to be just accepted blindly. And they don't also need to be suppressed or shut down if people think they are error. We have to follow what Ellen White says. And we have to be willing to be corrected. And I'm just talking here from a personal point of view. I hate being in this position that I'm in. I would rather someone else was doing what I'm doing. And this is not about me. And I feel sometimes a little bit discouraged because I look at the fact that I seem to be the one, doing presentations. Maybe there's other people doing presentations I don't know about, but I don't really want to be doing this. Sure, I like studying, and I do like presenting things that are true, things that I've studied. I like to see that. But my goal right now is to get everybody doing what I'm doing, to be studying, to be sharing, to be digging, to be writing articles for us to read and to look at. Because as we look at what we're going to look at tomorrow, I think that we're in a very specific place within Millerite history. We're after October 22nd, 1844, and we're before the 1850 chart. And that 1850 chart
that is having sorted through and making the corrections that were necessary to understand where we are, what new truths were developed in 1850 were a result of their disappointment. And Colin presented on Saturday night that God is going to give us more light. And that light is going to come with a price. So that's my appeal. That's what this is all about. I don't want people to think that somehow I have the answers to everything, because I don't. All I can do is rehearse what happened and how I see it as being a part of what happened. But there may be things that I definitely don't see, and I know I don't see everything, and that this truth is way bigger than one person or one mind. So that's my appeal in this study, is that somehow we can start moving beyond where we're at. And I think it's going to happen, but right now we're just kind of in this period of time where we're at least studying together. But there's a lot of individual study that has to happen in order for the studying together to be really effective. So I'm hoping that other people are studying and sorting through things in their own way. One of the things that has always happened as I've been in this message, I would find something very profound, like when I found the 4-7 times. Somebody always found those things at the same time. Jeff presented the 4-7 times at the same time I did at a camp meeting in Alberta. I remember when I found this 264 days or years, pardon me, of the 2 chiasms. And I found Christ's chiasm of 264 days. These different things. When I would find them, somebody else would find them as well. And so, to me, God is leading a movement. He's not leading an individual. So we're going to have to do this as a movement. But since this is organization, God's pouring out his Holy Spirit, and he's guiding it. So no man can direct this at this time. And maybe it's in a sense providential that Jeff isn't there telling us what to think. And maybe it's purposeful on his part for us to sort these things through. But we have to do it. And I would love to look to Jeff to just say, here's what happened. Here's the explanation. That would be so much easier. But right now we're given this difficult task. And so it's something that we're going to have to work through together. Does anyone else have any thoughts before we close with prayer? I know that I got about 5 minutes.
Over the past month, I've been taken back all the way to Genesis and walking through.
Yeah, that's a good plan.
Taking the whole trip through the Bible. He's had the Bible in my lap. And there's obviously things that we have missed throughout that picture that I've tried to put in my quiver.
Yeah. And that's what we have to do. And we have to examine our life and so forth. Also, Stephen corrected me, and I should have known better, that the June 29th writing of the July 18th letter, that's actually Pentecost in 457 BC, not the first day of the 5th month, which is, of course, completely ridiculous. But sometimes they make those errors. So June 29th, 1844, lines up with June 29th, 457 BC. And June 29th, 457 BC is Pentecost, which is actually a bit more significant. And what that's doing is it's taking that Pentecost, June 22nd, and it's connecting it to July 18th. And so I'll show that tomorrow. I don't know why I made that mistake. Now, Dwight says, when was Jeff has ever told us what to think? Jeff has never told us what to think. But we have often decided what to think in our laziness of of personal study. And I'm saying I'm guilty of that too. That's why I'm saying I would love it, if somebody could just tell me what to think. Now, just to sort of illustrate this, at least from my personal life, if I had a religious fantasy, so to speak, this might sound a little bit odd, but when I was a young man, I learned to play the classical guitar, and I learned to play it listening to music by John Michael Talbot, who originally was like a hippie Christian, and then he became a Franciscan monk. Even before he became a Catholic, you can actually become a Franciscan monk without being a Catholic, but he eventually became a Catholic. And the nice thing about being a Catholic is you don't have to think. And as much as I do like thinking can be a bit of a pain. And so if I ever had a religious fantasy as a kid, it would be this idea of just being a monk and just doing what you're told and playing guitar in a cave and that type of thing. So I think human nature doesn't like to do things. We like to do things the easy way. Maybe that's just my nature. But I know on my grade 5 report card, the teacher wrote and said, Teddy doesn't like to do things. He likes to do things the easy way, but not always the best way. My argument was, the easy way is always the best way. But anyway, the point is, Jeff has never told us what to think. He has always told us to study things out. But it doesn't mean that that's what we did. And I think part of what you see that happened in the division in the New Movement is that people wanted to follow man. And you can see that in how people are willing to just accept something that's being told them by Parminder and Tess. Even after they have all this study to believe something, all it takes is a word from Parminder or Tess to abandon that belief and to accept whatever Parminder and Tess say. And those people were in this movement, and they were doing that with Jeff. And hopefully we're not those types of people that we're just going to follow blindly anyone. And so, Jeff has always said not to trust what he has said, and that we need to study for ourselves. That is an absolute truth about Jeff. And that's one of the reasons I really respect Jeff. I respect him because of that, because he doesn't appeal to funds. And the other thing is that he acknowledges light that comes from other people and gives them credit for it. He doesn't just steal ideas and then go about making like they're his own. And that's really amazing that you're going to have somebody with his knowledge and his position that's a true leader who can take people and use them. I remember when I was in my early 20s and I worked in the self-supporting work in British Columbia, Canada. And the guy I worked with, Leroy, he was an old logger, and he was a talented man as far as accomplishing work. And I was a city slicker who'd never really done much work in his life. And I went there into this school to learn. And I worked with him day in and day out, logging, gardening, working in this water-powered sawmill. And what he would do that showed true leadership is he would always, when we had a problem to solve, he'd always ask me what I thought, how to solve this problem. And there's lots of times that I came up with an idea that he used, and he would say, that was a really good idea, that you had. And he didn't just come as this boss who just told me what to do. He taught me. And in that example, I see that same thing with Jeff. So Jeff, this criticism that you see that Samuel Snow has for the leadership that led them to October 22nd, 1844, that led them through that movement, and that accepted October 22nd, 1844, for him to cast them off in the way that he did is despicable, really. These were people led by God, and to call them, these three shepherds, the idol shepherd, and all this kind of name calling, even though he didn't call them by name, everybody knew who he meant. And then him sort of arguing, well, I didn't really mention them by name, but everybody knows. That's not the type of thing that we want to see happening in this movement. We don't want to be attacking the people in this movement, especially people like Jeff, who has been given a talent by God, and this movement wouldn't exist without him. But we do know that there is fanaticism and false teachings, and we know how to deal with those. So thanks for that, Dwight, and Stephen, for your comment as well. And hopefully tomorrow, because I have it in my mind how I want to bring it together. But I do want, and I've had some criticisms given about yesterday's study, in that it was a little bit esoteric and a little bit philosophical, dealing with Christ and him being the ladder, and dealing with Christ's line, and that I really need to deal with Christ's line in a more detailed way. So, I'm looking at studies that I need to do. I need to study out Ezekiel more thoroughly. We need to go through Christ's line and sort of look at what the Spirit of Prophecy says regarding all those events, those waymarks in Christ's line. There's a lot of things we have to do, and hopefully individually first, before we really come together and study them out. But so let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful again. We know, Lord, that the things that we are studying are hard to understand because of our laziness, our indolence. We know, Lord, that we need the character of Christ in every way. And we are thankful for this light that's being shed upon us. Help us to walk in that light. Be with each person. As I've prayed many times, Lord, we really need your help. We need your angels about us. We know that clouds of discouragement have pressed upon us over the last few weeks, various times and in various ways. And we know, Lord, that we see ourselves as sinners and that we have lots of self-doubt, but help us not to focus upon that, but to focus upon you, your forgiveness and your power to work in our lives. And also, Lord, we ask that we can put our trust in you. Be with us now throughout this day in our personal study, and bring us together again tomorrow morning to try to complete this task that you put before us. And we thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.